I'd like to take a few moments of your time to speak with you relevant to the situation and choices we have at the Hunking Middle School in Haverhill. My name is Jim Scully, and I'm the superintendent of schools here. Last year, when I came back to Haverhill and was fortunate enough to be selected as your superintendent, I toured all of our buildings. At such time, I noticed the horrible condition the Hunking School was in. First of all, the building was not well kept, and it was not clean. Through the efforts of many, with the cooperation with the parents, we got the building clean, and through the principal's efforts and the efforts of the many parents and our maintenance staff, the building was cleaned up and painted. Last year, we had the snowstorm, and when I went through the building, I noticed the beams supporting the roof were questionable, in my opinion. Not being an engineer, I saw cracks that I didn't like and became concerned. I contacted a structural engineer who stated that my concerns were well-founded, and he directed us to remove the snow from the roof immediately, which we did. So we went through the end of the school year, and we were very observant of the physical conditions of the building to make sure that all was well for the well-being of those people and students and staff that populate the Hunking School. Yet around October, after the building was painted and all cleaned up, the principal of the building called me, David Cook, and said, "Jim, I have some concerns relative to some cracks I'm starting to notice in the building." I got in my car and I met Mr. Geary, who's in charge of our facilities over at the school, and we found a sufficient number of cracks that were of serious concern to me. Cracks that were not there before, and cracks that were significant in size to raise immediate concerns. I then called a gentleman by the name of Robert Hasher, a structural engineer who reviewed the building in the previous year, and after his initial analysis, he directed me on a Thursday afternoon to vacate the building that weekend. And as the story has been circulated throughout the city, we did, and we reopened the Bartlett School at a cost of over $90,000 and took about 50% of the students from the Hunking School to the Bartlett School. We renamed the Bartlett School for the time being Hunking School North. We then had two concerns that we had to deal with. The first was the structural integrity of the north side of the building. Now, if you look at the Hunking School and you face the Hunking School, the section to the right has been that area designated as the north component of the building. It is in that component underneath the school that we found serious structural deficiencies. And if I can for a moment, I'd like to just point those out to you. So that all will understand, I would just like to show you what we found when we went into the section of below the north end of the building. You can see columns here just like you see on bridges that support our interstate highway system. You can also see up here rebars that were allegedly supposed to be twice the dimension that was called for in the specs when the building was built. In other words, as I understand it, these did not meet the specs of the building when the building was built. But that's history. The reality is what's under the Hunking School today and what has happened. And here's what's happened. The cement flooring has deteriorated, fallen to the floor, breaking the heating, ventilation, air conditioning system, damaging the electrical system, because all of the mechanical units for the Hunking School rest underneath the building. So as you can see here, the rebars have come down from the ceiling, the concrete supports have fallen, and you can see here, and I'll show you a better picture in a moment, that these cement columns have deteriorated to such a state that their integrity is also now in question. So what I'd like to do now is show you a close-up of what has happened in these columns. These columns have deteriorated to such a point that the rebars have fallen out of them. So if you think of the Hunking School and you think of our interstate highway system, if you were to go under a bridge on 93, let's say where 495 overpasses 93, and stop your car, the reality is, if you were to look up, the Hunking School is built just like the decking on the interstate highway system. So in other words, this would be you're driving underneath 93, and this would be 495 going above. Here are the columns that support the school. So like a bridge, this is how the school was built. So what has happened is the situation at the Hunking is that it has deteriorated and something needs to be done. Now the structural engineers have assured us that with the proper shoring up, the building could be used while we file for the application to build a new school. To build a new school in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in this day and age takes about 3 to 4.5 years and is a very time-consuming and costly adventure. So the choice that we face in Haverhill and the decision we have in Haverhill is threefold. A, do we go out and rent space somewhere else? B, do we go out and move our children all over the city? Or do we shore up the building and allow the children to use the building as it is currently configured? My recommendation will be to the Haverhill School Committee on Thursday evening, will be to shore up the building. And I say that for these reasons. First of all, we've had some environmental concerns. People have said it's a sick building, that there's this and that in the building. We have had testing after testing after testing conducted at the Hunking School, and we find two conditions. A, we've had found that mold was coming up from that moist area underneath the north wing, and we also found that because of the moisture, there wasn't the proper air circulation. In fact, the lack of proper circulation has caused the moisture problem to be exacerbated. What we have done is we have cleared up the air quality in the building with portable systems, and we have repaired the ductwork I showed you that was on the floor. Our maintenance staff, at a savings about of $100,000, has reconfigured the duct handling system and restored it to its full operational capacity. So the question remains then, if we fixed the mechanical systems, is the building usable? So we've addressed the environmental issues, and then the issue becomes, and everyone's main concern, is the structural issue. We have had a couple of engineers in there, and we've had some reputable firms advise us on what's the right thing to do. Both concur that the building can be shored up and the children can be in there safely. In fact, one of the individuals who had a look at the building is the same individual that you see throughout the Commonwealth shoring up our bridges, and that is SPS Construction Company. They're a firm that has a number of engineers and structural people involved that provide for our safety as we travel the interstate highway system. And they feel, with the advice of others and with their own internal experts, feel that the building would be safe and get us through this difficult time so the city can knuckle or wrestle with the problem of building a new school. Through this presentation, I hope I can share some facts and figures with you to let you know why I have made the recommendation to have these buildings shored up. The first being is, as you may have read in the newspaper, a number of young families at the Bradford Elementary School their parents have already decided to take them elsewhere because of the uncertainty of the conditions at the Hunking School and the lack of the city's ability to make its decision so that their children could go to a school which is properly designed and properly outfitted, if you will, for this day and age in a clean and safe environment. Every time we lose a child, and we have about 15 families already leaving from the Bradford Elementary School that would be at the Hunking School in 2 to 3 years. Every time we lose a student, we lose $5,000 per year. So if a student departs Haverhill at grade 3, that means we lose about 9 years. That's $45,000 per student. And every community realizes one thing: when a student leaves, they do not come back. So if you multiply 15 that we know of leaving times the 45,000, do the math. We are losing a tremendous amount of money, but more importantly than the money, we're losing nice young families whose children have the ability to succeed and participate in sports and in the activities of our school system. In my opinion, that's a shame to lose so many nice young families. The next issue is, could we rent portable classrooms? And the answer is yes. Our research has showed that portable classrooms cost about $200,000 per room. And to properly restore the Hunking in a portable classroom situation is about a $2.8 million cost. And that cost comes out of the city expenses. That is not a cost that is reimbursable. It is not a cost that comes out of any school department funds. That total expense comes out of the dollars of the city. And it's my opinion, with the debt that the city is facing currently regarding the former Hale Hospital, I personally think that's an undue burden on the city. The next is transportation, meaning what happens if we move students around the city? Well, right now we have 3 buses for Hunking, which cost us about $54,000 a year. If we were to add the number of buses all around Haverhill, meaning if we were to be taking students from the various neighborhoods to the various schools in the city, we have worked with the bus companies to calculate that the cost would be about $253,000. And the cost of adding supervision in those buses is about another $5,000. Those combined costs, less the $54,000 that we're now paying, would mean we'd be paying about $200,000 on an annual basis. So $200,000, and by statute, the school department does not pay for busing. That becomes another city cost. That's another $200,000 that's added annually to city expenses to move students around the city. To me, that's a tremendous cost that we really don't need to incur when we can safely, properly house the children at the Hunking. If we were to move students, that means we'd be moving students from the Greenleaf, from the Golden Hill, from the Kroll, the Pawtucket Lake. More than 75% of our school system would be making changes in student assignments for September. I can't see if the engineers and all of those involved with this can assure us that the building is safe, why we wouldn't do something that was best for the students and fiscally responsible without adding tremendous, tremendous cost to the city's tax or to the city's expenses at this particular time. That is why, and I know the mayor has agreed with me, and I trust that the other elected officials will, that we recommend shoring up the school. Other concerns that we have. Just today, we had an incident at one of our buildings where we had a student injured and we did not have handicap accessibility. People may not be aware of this, but we have a lot of buildings in our city that are not handicap accessible. We have so many young boys and girls in our schools that are on wheelchairs, on crutches, have physical disabilities that preventing from navigating the stairs and what have you to get around our schools. So that handicap accessibility really limits us. Next year, you've read in the paper, we just, through the efforts of Representative Dempsey, we secured a large state grant and to have full-day kindergarten in our schools. Now, to increase the number of kindergarten classrooms in Haverhill, we would need about 22 more classrooms. If I were to relocate the students, that addition of 22 classrooms plus the relocation of students means that the school system is overcrowded and we have no flexibility whatsoever. And in fact, I would not be able to put the full-day kindergarten in the schools in our city because we don't have enough room if I relocate the Hunking students. Another big negative is, as you may know, middle school students, elementary students today have access to technology. Some of our testing programs that the state requires are done at computer labs. And to move students around, we would lose some tech labs throughout our schools to accommodate the growing number of students. Dividing families. Some families have a student in the 5th grade and one in the 7th. That means your family, if you have 2 children, you might have one student going to school in one location and another child of yours going to school in another location. Next, we have compliance issues. In the Commonwealth, we have very strict special education laws and English language learning laws for students whose ability in the English language is somewhat limited. We have requirements on class size and different services that we have to provide. When we relocate, we compromise our issues in compliance, and while last year we were successful for the first time in a number of years of getting Haverhill out of hot water with the state on compliance, we would be back in that boat. And lastly, when I first came here last year, the Office of Civil Rights paid me a visit and explained to me their concerns about buildings like the Tilton, etc., that are not handicap accessible. Haverhill is on the radar screen for non-compliance with respect to physical disabilities. Keeping the Hunking open gives us another option. Earlier I showed you a photo of how the ductwork was on the floor. You can see during the February vacation how we've resecured some of that ductwork and some of the electrical components. During the April vacation, we're going to finish securing up so that come the close of school, hopefully with the approval of the Haverhill School Committee and the City Council, we can have SPS come in and put a number of lally columns. In fact, it would be a forest of lally columns underneath this building to make sure that the children and the staff are in a very safe and secure building. I know many of you, and many of you have expressed to me, why put money into a building when you have to tear a building down in a few years? Well, the reality is we've got to spend the money somewhere, either through relocation, portable classrooms, or renting space. All of those options are a tremendous expense. The most reasonable expense is to bring the students back into the school. Not only from a dollar point of view is that the most sensible solution, but it's also the most sensible, in my opinion, for families, of keeping students together, of letting students have a gymnasium. When we move students to other schools, all students will not have access to a gymnasium. They will not have the ability to have art and music classes as they currently can have at the Hunking. I, as a superintendent and as a father of 2 children, I would never recommend putting anybody in an unsafe situation. I look at every child as I look at my own 2 children. All of us love our families and want to make the right decisions in life. When we go to an airport, we get on an airplane. We trust the pilot. We trust the mechanics to make sure that when we board, we're going to have a safe and successful journey and landing. When you send your children to the schools, we have the awesome responsibility of trying to do what's right, both educationally and socially, for your children. We deal with over 8,000 children every single day and over 1,700 adults. It's not an easy situation to manage. But if you're sincere, if you're open, you're honest, and you're transparent, you try to make the right decisions. And that is why, as a school superintendent, I respectfully and strongly recommend that this issue of the Hunking School not be decided by rumor and opinion, but be decided on fact and be decided on what is right for the people of Haverhill. This is not an issue of Bradford versus Haverhill. This is an issue for all of Haverhill. The Hunking School issue, in my opinion, is about the health of Haverhill. Haverhill needs to look at its schools and what is the long-term solution to the many problems that we face today and we're going to face down the road if we continue to bury our heads in the sand and not put the reality of our physical situations relevant to our school building and our children on the table. Poor physical conditions, lack of confidence in the school system, all of these issues contribute to a deteriorating tax situation and the health of a community. Part of bringing families to Haverhill is providing them with a good education. And that means being able to also house them in a school that is fitting. Thank you for listening to me this evening. And please feel free to call me if you have any questions at 978-374-3405. I appreciate your kindness and I appreciate your understanding, and I thank you.